It is the future, where sunlight has left the earth, and humankind struggles in a losing battle against machines. A war that has now gone on for 40 years. In the sky, armor-plated robots search for signs of life to destroy, while in the mud of the earth, tanks roll over humanity without effort. Some are tired and beaten, ready to end it all, while others fight with their last breaths to escape a dire tomorrow. As the humans flee, a cleanup crew of robotic figures enter the battlefield. They are made to represent the coming end of the anthropoids. They rain down upon them, and now the future looks less brighter. Even in their main base, Skynet primes the nuclear missiles it has in stock. Soon, all of North America will be a wasteland of fire and brimstone. This is the burning earth. Hey guys, so I just decided, why don't we start out by talking about Alex Ross, the artist on the book, which was the main component as to why I even picked it up in the first place. There's a long quote here about the history by Alex Ross's account of what happened during his time and tenure on Terminator: The Burning Earth. So I'm just going to read the quote here and play some footage of Alex before we get to the story. In Alex's words. When this book came out in 1990, neither the publisher, Now Comics, nor the creative team of Ron Fortier and I were aware that James Cameron was preparing a sequel to his breakout hit movie from 1984. As far as we all knew, The Terminator was a one-and-done phenomenon. Aside from the Terminator's continued life on videotape and laserdisc, the comic book revival of the movie's concept seemed to be the only continuation of the franchise. When we made this miniseries, it was our intent to create a movie-like sequel to the much-enjoyed film. Now Comics had already run through a number of issues of a Terminator comic book before this project came up. I was working at an ad agency in Chicago doing storyboards when one of my coworkers who had freelanced on the side with Now was offered the Terminator miniseries. My friend turned to me and said, "Hey, you always wanted to do comics. Why don't you try out for this thing?" He was right. I had comic page samples ready to go, and I was hungry to get my start in the career I dreamed of. I just didn't think I had any special affinity for the world of Terminator. My coworker set up introductions, and I did additional samples to try to impress the publisher. I was mostly driven to get into comics wherever I could, and this freelance gig was ready to go, allowing me to achieve a particular burning ambition: to be published while I was still in my teens. I was 19 when I finished a quick 2-year program at the same art school my mom went to, and I was very lucky to find employment at all, let alone be doing art full-time for commercial storyboards. Now I could very quickly achieve the more vain goal of getting into the art form I'd idolized at a young age, which I thought would sound impressive to someone someday. What I would come to understand is that such a goal comes at a cost, namely that my first comics work should have to suck so much. Now that's not necessarily an absolute that has to happen to everyone, it just happened to me how I shaped the outcome. I was used to doing full-body portraits of live models in various media each day in my art classes, so I was very delusional about how fast I really was. I thought, hey, I could do a painting, drawing, or whatever a day. Add to that the ambition of keeping my basic learned style the same, painting the pages rather than inking them, Since the developing technology of laser scanning art has come into the business, I was encouraged to think that they could print whatever I turned in. There was no reason for me to try to learn a pen and ink style, except I really didn't paint beyond a certain point. I was trained as an oil painter primarily and had no skill with watercolors yet. Oil paint is wet for a long time, and is fairly unworkable for the finely detailed, multi-lane form of comics art. The rendering method that I was comfortable with was what I was using for my day job in storyboard art, markers, and colored pencils, which proved a very difficult way to illustrate the series. When I started the first issue, I was living with my parents again. I say again because I had just completed 2 years of independence with their money before I could eventually afford my own way out, like many people do. Each day I could come home from downtown Chicago to sit at the kitchen table, which was the only broad, clear surface available to do my work, and attempt to make fully rendered colored pages for The Burning Earth. I burned myself out within about 2 pages. On the second page I had close-ups of faces, an opportunity to put my best foot forward with the kind of realism I yearned to make. I had a few photos I'd quickly scrounged up, and I soon learned that I needed way more than I had to do this job like I had imagined. I knew there was no time in the schedule to shoot photo reference myself. I didn't even own a camera yet, and I really couldn't see how I could assemble all of the specific models, props, and lighting equipment that I thought I would need. So if you look at page 2 from issue 1, you'll see that the transition mid-page between the kind of more photo-based, realistic comic I originally wanted to do and the drawn-out-of-my-head series that followed. By the end of issue 1, I also recognized that I needed a quicker illustration shortcut to get away from drawing and coloring on white paper. From issue 2 on, I was finally living on my own, and I worked on black illustration board for the rest of the 5 issues. I built up from white paint, put on highlighted areas to a waxy colored pencil finish for the illusion of painting. It's truly horrible. I did feel that I got better at it as I went along, and it was a true trial by fire to lay out and draw a comic by mind's eye only, with no reference to fall back on, though I did begin to incorporate likenesses of former fellow students as background characters to keep myself interested. The one thing I felt most appealing about the original Terminator film that I tried to connect with artistically was the story's true lead, played by Linda Hamilton. In the story, though, her character was long since dead, believe it or not. I tried to translate her face through her adult future son, bearded and Christ-like to boot. With my graphic limitations, I still had the hubris to think I could craft a credible painted comic sequel to the now legendary film. For all we knew, this was all there would ever be. Perhaps the greatest acknowledgement of our book-making any kind of mark is that now commissioned another painted Terminator miniseries shortly afterwards. This one actually was painted. For me, Terminator clearly opened up multiple doors in my comics career. Kurt Busiek contacted me to work for Marvel, and I gained inspiration for what would become Marvels in a sale pitch. With my cover illustration for this reprinted volume, I pay homage to my Marvel's inspiration by painting a Terminator skeleton on fire again. For the second time in 23 years, the original Burned Earth collection, where I first painted this, helped me realize that I would like to paint the Human Torch. Those are the nicest things I can say about this work experience. There was a lot of acrimony with the publisher, and I have plenty to regret about my performance, thinking I could have done a much better job for my start in comics. It turns out that having a 9 to 5 day job, 5 days a week, plus 23 painted pages, and a cover to do each month is an unhealthy combination. I lived through it and learned to manage my time and expectations a bit better. Since we would all learn that James Cameron was returning with the inimitable T2 shortly after we finished our series, it did seem like a bit of a joke. I know that it nearly killed me to make a sequel to his original film, but I shouldn't regret it too much. I did get a comic out while many of my fellow students were still in school, so I could feel like a big shot. I got my first comic book series lawsuit in real early, and I learned valuable lessons. Blah, blah, blah. I will look at this collection as a monument to my boundless ambitions. I hope you will look at this as an interesting piece, the history of the Terminator franchise. Now, what Ross is referring to when he says he didn't have a good time and the lawsuit with Now Comics is referring to the fact that when Now Comics went out of business, they weren't able to pay him for all of his work, which is why on issue 5, the Sarah Connor cover, you can see written backwards in the writing, it says Now Comics blows. And Ross hid that there specifically because it was showing and representative, and still is today, of how he felt and what he went through trying to create this comic. Alright, so as for the writer, Ron Fortier, I only actually found 2 quotes by him. One saying, I wrote a 5-issue Terminator series called The Burning Earth, which was illustrated by this new kid named Alex Ross. It was his first comics work ever. Wonder whatever happened to him. Ha. And then there's a second quote where he elaborates a little bit more on how he got involved with Now Comics, stating, the artwork for this series was the first ever comics work by Alex Ross, today considered the finest graphic novel artist in the business. I came on board with Now Comics about a year after they came on the scene. I met the publisher at their San Diego Comic-Con booth and we hit it off. He had been publishing The Terminator for almost 6 months and was not happy with the direction the current writer was taking the series. By the time I left San Diego, I'd taken on that particular series as its new writer, and given the publisher my Green Hornet package. 2 months later, they got the Green Hornet license, and I was writing 2 monthly titles for them. Honestly, the reason I picked up this book again was for Alex Ross's art. So let's actually dig into the story. So, as I alluded to in my opening, the Resistance is trekking through the wasteland of North America when they are suddenly ambushed and attacked in a trap by Skynet. They are attacked from the sky as well as the ground by tanks. It seems futile for them to fight back, and immediately they are already losing the battle and too many casualties are going on. So much so that they have to leave the scene and flee. We learn that the guy named Bear is actually John Connor, and they say don't count the bear out yet, Connor has never let us down before. But in John Connor's mind, there is a very poignant moment where he's by himself, and he says, enough, I'm just too tired. It has to end, please dear God. This life of constant suffering. I can't take it anymore. I just want to rest. Maybe that would not be so bad. And he reaches for his gun. I just want to sleep for more than an hour. In death, there is oblivion. Maybe I can find the peace this world could not provide. So easy to sleep forever. And he puts his gun inside of his mouth, planning to blow his brains out. But something interesting happens just then. A woman says her leg is caught and she can't run. And the guy next to her, Joey, says, you have to. And the tank is right on them, and Joey starts firing at it. But he says, I'm not going to leave you here, even though the girl tells him, save yourself. And John watches this unfold. He says, why doesn't he run? He can't save her. Why? So he starts to blast at the tank himself, but it's too late. They're both ran over. And John realizes he would not let her die alone. It was worth enough to him to give up his own life. Oh God, forgive me. And he screams out as lightning rains down. We won't give up. Do you hear me, machine? We won't stop coming. I swear it. And he has a renewed sense of faith in the war and the resistance. But as they're fleeing, something odd and peculiar happens as well, as these Terminators come up to kill the remnants of what's left, maybe dying on the battlefield, and they look like Cylons from Battlestar Galactica. Nobody ever acknowledges this in any of the quotes or anything, or Ross doesn't say anything about it in his art, so I'm kind of curious why this happens. But they still look pretty cool nonetheless, even though he's still in his quote-unquote amateur stage of artistry. But that's basically the end of issue 1. So let's move on to issue part 2. So this next part is actually really cool. In issue 2, we're introduced to this Terminator with synthetic flesh on it, something that's new to the human race. They've never seen these types of Terminators before, T-800s. And it's a woman that's walking into a room where there's 3 humans captured by Skynet holding weapons. She calls herself Aurora. Test number 808. Survivor adaptability, she says. And that's when they realize, my god, she's a Terminator. So the humans here kind of scatter, and although they try to fight back, it's futile because it immediately slaughters all of them. It's actually a pretty cool scene, and the introduction of Aurora really got me excited to see if she's going to play a bigger role in the story later on. Aside from that, when we go into actual Skynet, we learn that the bombs that they have are ready to be unleashed upon the world, basically eradicate what's left of the human race. But before we get to that, we go back to the Resistance, where John is taking out any wounded in the battlefield. The Resistance is kind of worried about him losing his humanity and them losing their humanity because of how they're doing this. But John has already realized that they have no medicine or supplies to heal these people, and all they're doing is suffering. But just then, a scout looks out to the sky and says, "Look, hunter-killers." And as they look up, the sky is full, so many that they get a little worried and they prepare for battle. But then they realize that they're not there to destroy them specifically. This is when they realize that the bombs on them are from NORAD, and that they're going to eradicate what's left of the human race. So John prepares for battle and says, "Skynet is playing its trump card, people. Mount up. We're going to Thunder Mountain." So the Resistance gets in their cars, and they head off for their final battle, to attack Skynet. In issue number 3, the Resistance is climbing Thunder Mountain, and they're trying to get away from all the treacherous traps and avoid fighting as many Terminators as possible. The Cylon-looking Terminators return here, and there's a lot of back and forth between the Resistance and Skynet in trying to stop them from climbing the mountain. And at some point, they even take to climbing the walls of the mountain. So it's kind of a straightforward issue. The only part that kind of takes me by surprise is the ending of issue number 3, when Skynet reveals that there's an army of T-800s that they're ready to unleash on John Connor and the last of humanity. Alright, as we begin issues 4 and 5 together, they make up the brunt of the last of the story here. Wait a second. Do you see what I see here on this first page? Anyway. So, the hunter-killers are flying around the cities of America, North America, and they are finally dropping the bombs, and the Earth is literally burning. Hence, the burning Earth. This is ground zero for the rebellion as they try to fight off the Terminators as the cities explode around the world. Now, the rebellion themselves are in a firefight with a bunch of Terminators, T-800s to be exact, and they are slightly winning, sometimes slightly losing, but they make a good break for it and they get inside Cyberdyne, aka Skynet. They get inside Thunder Mountain, aka Skynet, and they're not really sure where to go. It's just NORAD Command Center, but they're trying to make it deep within to try and figure out a way to shut down the main CPU. on the flip side of this, another part of the resistance is running over these open craters as lava and earth is exploding from the mountain. And they're trying to go and stop and see if they can take out the main generator of Skynet so that the resistance inside of Skynet can have a better chance at fighting their way through there. In fact, they just want to power down all the Terminators is their mission. So going back inside, John/Bear, they start to realize that there are targeting systems on maps and that they're targeting major cities with their bombs. So all their theories were correct about the hunter-killer machines flying overhead. But just then, another army of T-800s breaks in and starts unloading fire on them. And this is pretty much the point where the resistance inside of Skynet is losing the battle. And they're finally not sure what to do. They know that they're dying way too rapidly. So one of the resistance fighters, throws out a bomb and he says, "Hey, gorgeous, catch." And he throws it to the Aurora T-800. And the stupid Terminator catches it, while another Terminator says, "No," and she says, "I have it." But of course, the grenade explodes. They all blow up in a blaze of fire. But before they're totally gunned down and outnumbered by what's left of the T-800s, they blow a hole in the wall and crawl through, trying to escape. Then they find themselves on a catwalk, and John tries to get himself down because they think that they found the main CPU of Skynet. Of course, outside, the other resistance fighters are fighting to get to the generators outside, and then we cut right back to John swinging down on a rope, and suddenly the Terminator sees him and he gets shot down from it and lands right in front of another Terminator that has its gun pointed at him, dead to rights. It looks like this is the end for John Connor. But suddenly, it slows down, just like all these Terminators. Then the lights go out, and for a second everyone is bathed in darkness. Then comes silence, sweet silence, and the puppet strings have been cut. Skynet is now gone. Because the resistance fighters outside have powered down the main generator of Skynet. The resistance team has won. The fight is over. But John questions, is it really over? I don't know if we'll never know the answer to that. That is a question for tomorrow. And we see him being carried out by what's left of the fighters into this brave new world. But inside Skynet, an eerily thing happens. The powered down Terminator once comes back to life. The end. So I just want to thank everyone for watching this. Obviously, this book was done before Terminator 2. They had no idea what was coming. The only future war that they'd seen on the big screen is the one that's shown in the Kyle Reese version. It's not the, nightmare versions and the beginning version of T2, where the Terminator famously cracks down on a pile of skulls. All that stuff comes later in the years, so it's an interesting thing to look at this book and see the concepts of Alex Ross and Ron Fortier, trying to come up with how this war ended and how they beat Skynet. And so it's a passage in time before what became fully Terminator became Terminator. And I actually enjoy this graphic novel a lot. I have a couple of the single issues. And personally, what I did is I went onto a roof where I was living at the time in Tucson, Arizona. And I pulled up a chair. I put in my headphones. I put the Terminator soundtrack on very softly. And I flipped pages and read them. And to be honest, that was such a great experience going through this. I highly recommend everyone read this and go get a copy. It's called Terminator: The Burning Earth, and it's a great comic book. On the flip side of that, there is one last thing we have to talk about, and that's that we all kind of had a friendly little debate in the chats, or comments section, I should say, of my RoboCop versus Terminator timeline video. I had accidentally called RoboCop an android when he's clearly a cyborg. People were correcting me, and I made a little posted comment saying, okay, I know I messed up there, and I'm sorry. But then people were starting, and I was saying, Terminator's an android, RoboCop is a cyborg, and that's that. But then people started saying, in a friendly debate, nobody needs to get mad about this, please don't leave hate comments, we're just doing this for fun, that indeed Terminators were cyborgs, and I couldn't disagree more, and I'll tell you why. So, a cyborg is a human being that is given mechanical body parts. That is the definition of a cyborg. It's a human that's given robot parts. On the flip side of that, an android is a machine given human parts. So when Kyle Reese says it's a cyborg in Terminator 1, he's actually wrong. It's an android. And people will argue, well, the flesh is living. The flesh is living. And there's two comments I've said where Skynet took the flesh from humans, and then there's another fact I've seen where Skynet created the synthetic flesh. So, ergo, it still wouldn't be human. And even if it was human, the whole system of this robot started as a robot. It didn't start as a human, hence it's still an android. Now, the argument could be made that it's being made more human by the flesh that's put onto it because it is indeed living flesh. But again, underneath it, at its core, it is an android. It is a robot. Therefore, it cannot be a cyborg. So Kyle Reese was wrong. Of course, you can always leave your comments below and refute this, and I welcome anyone to have a friendly debate about it, and also anyone to let me know what they thought of this comic book, because that's the most important thing to me, is what people thought of this, especially the art, considering it was Alex Ross's, first professional work before he went on and did Marvels at Marvel. So please let me know what you thought. Thanks everyone for supporting the channel. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe. The channel was growing pretty fast for a second. It's kind of wind down a little bit, and it would be awesome if it got picked up again, because these videos do take a lot of work, And I just want to make sure that my time isn't wasted putting all the effort into these. And while my time is limited, I do try to do as much as I can with them. So I appreciate everyone subscribing to the channel. Anyways, hasta la vista, babies. I'll catch you later.